Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a comment. Go over to our website, legendssuperstitionmountains.com. Last week, last chance. It'll just be a few days after this. People will be arriving. The 21st annual Dutch Hunter Rendezvous. November 14th, 15th, and 16th. Lots to do. Come on out. Just come out Saturday. We have a hike starting around 7:30 down into Barks Canyon. We have Woody Wampler doing a prospecting class. Unfortunately, the Tuttle National Forest will not be able to be with us at this time, but there are a number of other guest speakers and of activities we have planned through the day for everyone. And additionally, the guest speakers begin after the dinner service. We have first come, first serve, chili dogs, chili, hot dogs, whatever you want. And then we have our guest speakers roll out just around dusk. And we have a lot of really good people. We have Glenn Rogers, as his book, 10 Reasons It's Not in the Superstitions. And we have Cracking the Code, the Lost Dutchman author, Jason Fritsch. And we also have, I forget her name all the time, Vanessa Lacita. She will be out from us. She's from Oak Island, works, actually was the CEO. I don't know what her position or spot is right now with ROC Rock, but she's the girl that puts the big cans in the ground. So it'll be kind of neat, and we have a number of other people. Hopefully Richard Lavelle, a geologist, will be able to make it. He hadn't completely confirmed, said he wanted to come out. We have a few other people coming out, so there should be a lot of special and some surprise guests and things. But we have a nice program set up, so come out and join us Saturday evening, if nothing else. That being said and done, let's get to today's story. Today's story is going to be one of those reminiscing stories. I was sitting around this week, and I was thinking about the trip. We're going to make the hike into Barks. And I was thinking of the times I've been up through Cardiac and the various different trips, which has been a lot of trips through there. That was one of my favorite ways to get back in the mountains, is up Cardiac, through Barks, and into Needle Canyon. And I was thinking of this particular one. It had happened in the early 90s. And I'd went in, parked, started up. I was by myself. And my idea was to go back up over Barks into Needle Canyon, hit the crosscut, and then come back out. And it was just going to be a day-long hike. Nothing in particular I can think of or remember anything about it. Of course, everything changed a bit about the day, but I think it was just meant to kind of do that hike. Is oddly enough, years later, probably about 12 or 13 years later, it was the hike Randy Wright and I were going on, and Randy got out in front of me and I never found him, and then came home and had to call his wife and talk to his wife and find out if he ever came home from the mountains. So, and he did. He survived, obviously, but that was our first time out, the hike we took that we never saw each other. Anyhow, I went out, I went in, and as I'm coming down and I get up out of Cardiac and the 3 stages of that, and I'm starting to do the zigzag and drop down towards Bark, I see someone on the trail in front of me. Now, with a lot of people, I don't know if they feel the same way. I always feel like you're back in there and you feel kind of isolated. And I don't mind seeing people come towards me, and then there's a moment where you say good morning or afternoon and you just pass on by. Sometimes you stop at there's a place you want to stop, and you stop and maybe you have a few minutes, talk a few minutes. And sometimes people ask questions. It's kind of odd, and then they seem to be surprised you know the answers. But in this case, the person was in front of me going the same direction, and I was kind of slowly catching up. And I always feel like I'm kind of intruding. It's intrusive because you're slowly catching up, which means you're going to catch up, and then the person's going to realize you've been behind them. And now they get to watch the backside of you as you slowly kind of pull away and everything. So I kind of hung back, and then I lost them whoever it was, just before barks, where you kind of go in the denser foliage. I lost them. Come down, turn into barks, and there's a gentleman, older gentleman, sitting on the boulders under the trees across from the Peralta Rock. And I came in there, and I always take a break there. So I went over a little bit away from him, sat down on a rock, take a break, have a drink of water, and a smoke, of course. And he said good morning, and we talked about the weather, which always is the thing that kind of opens most of these conversations. And he said, yeah, he was going in. He was going to try to make it to Al Morro's camp. He wasn't sure if he had it in him, but he was going to take that route through Needle Canyon, get to Al Morro's camp, and then back out. He said he just figured he had kind of an idea in mind of a halfway point and all, and asked what and I told him I'm just, because there's nothing to hide, I'm going to do the cross cut. Oh, that's quite a walk. And yeah, we talked for a bit. And since we were going the same way, he said, hey, if you don't mind, I don't know if you're in a hurry or anything. I know you got a lot further to go than I do really today. But would you mind walking with me? I was like, I don't really have a problem. So I just figured I'd stick with him. And he started talking about how he'd been coming in the mountains for many, many years. Found out he was 70, 71. And he started coming out with his brother. And he had an older brother. And the older brother and him had spent a lot of time in the mountains. They'd spent time at Whiskey Springs, Charlie Boy Springs, White Rock. They'd spent time up in Squaw. They'd spent time on Bluff Springs. Spent time over by the Three Red Hills. Just all over the place. And he talked about how they just camped and made different trips growing up. He talked in the 70s as some of the camps. Wasn't particularly fond of walking through those areas like Charlie Boy or Squaw because of the people in those areas. But he said no one ever gave us a hard time. People would just stare at us. And you kind of feel them staring at you as you went through camp. He said he really enjoyed those years, and then his brother started having some health problems. And when his brother had health problems, he decided he didn't want to go back anymore. But by that point, his nephew was almost old enough, was in his late teens, and had made a couple trips with him. So his nephew started going with him. And he said until about 5 or 6 years ago, his nephew always took trips with him and was out back in the mountains with him. But unfortunately, his nephew got a job and had to move his family away. And so he said that was the end. And as we continue to walk, he talked about a few different trips and what he enjoyed about the mountains. And I was enjoying hearing about it because it was kind of a little bit of a monologue. Nothing in particular, but just how much he enjoyed different places. You couldn't tell his favorite place because each place he brought up, there was a number of things he really enjoyed. And he remembered different times, and they made multiple trips to these places. He's talking, and then he talks about, the last 3-4 years have been difficult. His wife had passed away. And he said that left him more time, but he says, now I don't get around as well. And then his brother passed away of a heart attack. And he said, unfortunately, that was devastating to him as well. So he said, I like to come out, but there's really nobody around anymore. And so he'd been kind of cautious of going out and making shorter trips, but he wanted to make a few longer trips because he realized, he did tell me, this could be one of my last long trips. I don't know how many more trips I have. I'm having problems. And we're getting back around Weaver's Needle, and I'm realizing I'm going to have to break off the crosscut. And then we stopped, and I think that was going to be our parting of ways moment. And then he was like, I don't think I can make it today. He said, I don't have that in me. I can't come down this hill and get out there, and I'm not going to be able to come back out. I'm going to have to turn around and head back. And I kind of felt it. Day warmed up a bit, and I said, well, I don't feel great about you going back out by yourself. And I said, I really didn't have a plan. I said, if you don't mind, just to make sure you're good and everything's fine, I'll walk out with you. And he smiled, and he seemed pretty happy about that. So we turned around, started walking back. And as we're walking back, he showed me, and I noticed it a little, he had a tremor in his hand. And he said he'd had the onset of Parkinson's beginning. He said it really wasn't affecting a lot, but he had tremors. And he said sometimes in one of his legs and his hands, so he appreciated me going with him. He said, I think I'm pretty good, but I know my days are numbered. And he said, it kind of makes this that much sweeter each trip I have out, but it's a bit bitter. It was a wonderful walk through the mountains. Hearing about his friendship and his time in the mountains with his brother. I'm hearing about the times with his nephew, who he had a lot of respect for, was a very good guy, and all these trips. And he was interested at times. I would talk about trips. I would say, yeah, oh, okay, Whiskey Spring. And I knew where he was talking, and we would talk about something. And I could tell he was really enjoying it. I was so happy to meet someone that kind of shared that same perspective of just enjoying the mountains, enjoying being in the mountains. He talked how he and his brother had searched for the Lost Dutchman. I remember it was a bit humorous because he said we could have walked over it. Neither of us were geologists. Neither of us probably would know gold if we found it, the difference between gold or pyrite. He said, but once we got going, we would always go home after a trip and rethink things and read stuff and then kind of recalibrate. Towards the end of the trip, as we were leaving, he started talking about, and he said he met a lot of people back in the mountains, but he said he didn't really know anyone. He said he'd been down through and had been through Al Morrow's camp and seen Chuck Ayler, Chuck and Peg Ayler, and he'd seen a lot of these people. He talked about one individual that I thought was very funny, and he was talking about the used car salesman. And he said it was this guy, kind of bald guy, and he kind of like just talked like he was trying to sell you something. And he said he was, you know, just chatty as hell, but you didn't trust him. It was like he was going to sell you a lemon and all. And I'm like, where did you run into him? He said, I ran into him. There was a group of them camped back over by Squaw. And I said, I'm sure that was Crazy Jake. So that was the first time I've ever heard of that, is where Crazy Jake was definitely referred to as a used car salesman. But it kind of fits in a way that he had that gift of gab and was trying to convince this guy and his brother. So he probably was looking at recruitment. He didn't know anyone in particular, but he recognized the name, said he'd met people in the mountains, and people would exchange names, and he said he just added it up. I'd told him about, you know, the different places I went, and that I had lost most of my friends that I'd been going in, and I was kind of on my own. Now, this is long before this gentleman, if he would have lived and I would have been able to stay in contact with him, would have loved something that came around about 12, 13 years later, the Rendezvous, because he probably would have ran into people he knew or met on the trail, which was one of the reasons for the Rendezvous, is reconnecting people to meet. The forum for me when I first got in was, I'll run into people that I knew that were into it, even if they're not hiking anymore, they'll be in here and showing interest. I'll reconnect with friends, which I didn't. The only person I reconnected with after all those years was a few years ago was Russ Ragsdale, who I'd been in the mountains probably with in 76, 77, somewhere around there. So that was crazy to me, is that when Russ just basically kind of was like, he couldn't remember me, but I was telling him about being out in the mountains with his brother and his brother's friend and a bunch of other stuff. And it was like, I kind of clearly knew what I was talking about and name dropping, but he was like, how do you know that? What? And I remember visiting his house with his parents and stuff. And I didn't know Russ as well as I knew his brother Dave, but it's interesting, and that was what I thought this gentleman would have loved about what we do now with the Rendezvous, which is our tie-in for our story today, kind of reminiscing, but the Rendezvous is that. It's less and less of that as we get further along. 21 years, I can remember what it was like 18, 19 years ago when we could sit around a campfire and it was Clay Wurst and Tom Collenborn and Bob Corbin and Dan Hopper was sitting there and Ron Eagle, and the group of us would be sitting around and you would just listen to these guys, and they were friends, but it was just kind of a really cool social atmosphere. It's not being a fly on the wall. You were sitting there at the campfire with them. And there wasn't nothing competitive, which was the wonderful thing about the Rendezvous. One of them would talk about a story and be like, I didn't know about that. And then another one would tell another story. And we heard some pretty good stuff. Some of it was funny, but it was interesting and important because it was people that had a common bond, which was a love for the mountains, spending time in the mountains, sitting around talking about those days past that weren't probably coming around anymore. I think around the time we started the Rendezvous, the guys' hardcore days of going in the mountains were just about done. And it's hard for me to look back and say 20 years ago, you know, a bunch of these guys were in their early 50s that come out now and are in their 70s. It's kind of like, wow, time flew by. And everybody just kind of started aging. But it's great to get together. It's great together at the Rendezvous because unlike funerals, we actually get to sit around and kind of, it's a good mood. It's a good thing, looking at the stars, looking at the campfire and everything. So I hope everyone comes out. I don't know, the gentleman's name was John, but he went by Jack. And don't know what happened to him. That was the only time I ever met him. Now, a lot of these stories come from, I would note things down about trips and stuff. And as I go through my archives, my papers and stuff, and I'm looking to throw stuff away that's useless and just repetitive and stuff, and I'll find something and I'll go, oh, and the wonderful thing about doing these stories is I'll kind of sit around and think about it, and I'll start to remember a lot about it. So as you get older, it's a great memory game. Now, there's a lot of that trip I don't remember because we talked for hours and hours, but I remembered the gist of it. And I hope he's well. If he is well, my God, he has to be 100 or over 100 now. But I hope he had a few more trips, and I hope he had a good life for those trips. So remember, when you come to the Rendezvous, spend time with everyone. I've always told the story. Gentleman sitting in the dark. Looked over. I wanted to have a cigarette. I left the main group. Baker Looney was there, Ron Eagle, a bunch of people in Joe Robato's camp. And they're drinking and they're talking and having a good time. This gentleman's sitting in the dark and he's smoking a cigarette. So I went over there to light a cigarette. And I sat on a chair next to him. And we're kind of sitting in the shadows talking. And I introduced myself and he said, "Hi, I'm Brian Lickman." And Brian started talking to me, sitting there, about his time with Al Morrow, his time with Chuck Ayler, his time with Crazy Jake, and all the trips and everything back in the mountains. And I just was mind-blowing of meeting someone who'd spent such significant amount of time with a lot of people you consider legends. And I will say Brian's a legend himself. To this day, it's one of the people I really enjoy meeting and hooking up with and sitting around and talking to. I know Brian's in his 80s now, and he's not back in the mountains. He wishes he was because, you know, he had so many great years. But it's wonderful to go and meet some of those guys still. And I got the privilege, and Trevor's had the privilege to sit with so many people over the years. So there you go, tie into the Rendezvous. Please watch Chasing Legends on Monday, which you are if you're doing this. Catch our shorts for this day in the Superstitions. We'll be seeing how we segue that into something for next year, a little longer piece. Maybe not 5, 6 of them a day, but we'll try to find stuff for daily here and there that gives you a longer version of the short pieces we've given you over through the year. And catch us on Friday Lives, which this week we will try to see if we can do something briefly live from camp. But there is no live again because it just would buffer and we'd have too many problems and not know how well it's turning out. So chances are you'll have radio silence until we get, outside of a few pictures people will post till we get back on that following Monday. And then the next Friday we'll do a wrap up on the Rendezvous. But come out, it looks like it's going to be a good crowd. Frank says it's going to rain all weekend. Cats and dogs and howling demons from the sky. Lightning will perish everyone in the camp. He says it will be a freezing cold with hail and snow. I don't think any of that's going to happen. I don't know what Frank's been smoking, but he's been smoking something. But anyhow, hey, we're mountain men. Come out and enjoy us out there. If the weather's great, we're in the amphitheater. If it's a little inclement and we're worried about the equipment, we'll be up in the big Ramada. Hopefully we get a break and it's nice evening weather because it looks like we're going to have a big crowd. So thank you all so much for coming out. We will see you Friday the 14th, and we will see you next Monday and then the following Friday. But thank you for all your support with Chasing Legends and Legend of the Superstition Mountains. And only one last thing to say. I have a shirt that says it, but I forgot to put it on today. Always remember the important words to close out our program. I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was chasing legends.